Attention all you rule breakers, you misfits and troublemakers, all you free spirits and pioneers, all you visionaries and nonconformists. Everything the establishment has told you is wrong with you is actually what's right with you. You see things others don't. You are hardwired to change the world.
You are listening to the Spiritual Activist Radio Show, and I am Rahasya Uncensored, where we look at the world not as it is, but as we know it can be, if and only if we have the courage to question the answers we've been given. This is our world, and it's time for us to take it back. All right. Jim Brobeck. First of all, I want to welcome everybody to the Voices of Water and the World Water Weekend. And just to tell you a little bit about Jim and what he's doing, it's with AquAlliance. And AquAlliance exists to defend Northern California waters and to challenge threats to the hydrologic health of the Northern Sacramento River watershed by engaging in regional water agency proceedings and consulting with scientists, politicians, and attorneys. AquAlliance is prepared to confront escalating attempts to divert water from the Northern Sacramento River hydrologic region. And besides being an excellent musician, Jim Brobeck is a water policy analyst for AquAlliance. So how would you like to start this out, Jim? Because a lot of people, they hear about water and they really don't even know what the region is. So what is the Greater Valley of the Great Central Valley of California that we're talking about here?
The Great Central Valley is a gigantic geologic feature that runs from approximately Bakersfield all the way up to Redding. There are three portions of it: the Tulare Basin, which used to hold the largest freshwater lake west of the Great Lakes, the Tulare Lake. And above that is the San Joaquin Valley. And then you hit the Delta, and above the Delta is the Sacramento Valley. And most of my work has to do with the Sacramento Valley and the watershed that feeds the Sacramento Valley. That's the region we're talking about today, from the mountaintops all the way out through the Golden Gate.
You know, I think a lot of people really don't get the seriousness of this because it's funny too, because what was his name? I was listening to Robert Glennon. He wrote Unquenchable, America's Water Crisis and What to Do About It. And he used the analogy of a milkshake, and you put a straw in, and the government just allows as many straws as possible to go in there. And when it's gone, it's gone. But I think to add to that analogy, it's like blind people drinking out of that glass. We don't know how serious it is until the very bitter end. And I think we're getting close to these kinds of situations right now. And if we don't wake people up to this, I'm not too sure how this is going to end. I like to stay positive on these things, but the only way I can stay positive is doing things like this with people like you. So where are you at right now? And do you think lawsuits is about the only way that we can really confront these people?
Lawsuits is a final attempt after other attempts to engage with the policymakers. So much of the state of California has mismanaged its water. For instance, the surface water has been allocated to a point that there's 5 more times surface water anticipated to be delivered than actually exists in the natural system. Groundwater is similar. In the San Joaquin Valley, over the past 50 years or so, the unregulated groundwater extractions have caused large portions of the San Joaquin and Tulare Basin to actually settle into the ground up to 100 feet in some places, which creates big problems with infrastructure, including, ironically, canals that are meant to transport surface water, so that they can't even use some of the canals to their capacity because the ground that holds up the canal has shrunk. Fortunately, here in the Sacramento Valley, we still have a relatively balanced aquifer system But we do have years like this year, 2020 and 2021, that has had very low precipitation. And so the demand for water is going to far exceed the amount of water that's available. The state of California knows it. The water marketers know it. Environmentalists who follow water know it. The farmers certainly know it. One of my big concerns is that the state of California has often looked to the aquifers underneath the Sacramento Valley as a backstop for water deliveries south of the Delta when years like this occur, when the snow melt is not going to meet the demand, it's not going to refill the reservoirs. And so water purveyors think that maybe they can tap the aquifer in the Sacramento Valley. But this will only recreate problems that have already occurred in the San Joaquin Valley. Since 2014, the state of California has recognized that unregulated groundwater is going to be a disaster throughout the state, so they created the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. This is one of many water policy venues that I engage with in the planning process and in the public meeting process. I think it's important to be engaged in these processes as stakeholders in order to provide input, provide a different perspective than water purveyors might think is the appropriate way to go, so that we can highlight the importance of the ecosystem that the water depends upon, because the ecosystem is the metaphorical canary in the coal mine for human being health and safety. So in the past 15 years, I've been on various committees in Butte County. I was on the Water Advisory Committee. I served on the Butte County Fire Safe Council for almost 10 years, which is managing the watershed in a way that doesn't rely on timber receipts. And finally, the state of California is starting to recognize that we need to reinstate fire as a primary management tool, controlled fire, prescribed fire, cultural fire into the watershed. And right now I serve on the Stakeholder Advisory Committee for a subbasin in the Sacramento Valley called the Vinus Subbasin. And in it, I provide input on the importance of groundwater for valley oak trees, the importance of groundwater for salmon rearing habitat in the small ephemeral streams, and for the sustainability of the water for the historic family farms that have been here for 100 years. And I advocate for all these things and bring this to the table, hopefully, so it doesn't have to move on to court. But occasionally, the group I work for, AquAlliance, does employ lawyers as well as hydrologists and other scientists to challenge efforts to increase the amount of water that they can pull out of this area and send south, primarily to subsidized farms in the San Joaquin Valley. Oftentimes when we're talking about water, water purveyors will mention, well, we need to provide the water for the 30-some million people that live in the urban areas of Southern California. But the urban areas have been able to stabilize their demand on water. Even though the population since the 70s has approximately doubled in the metropolitan area south of the Tehachapi's, they're using approximately the same amount of water that they were during the 70s. About 80% of the developed water goes to irrigated agriculture in the state of California. And 80% of the water that's sucked out of the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta also goes to these farms that have popped up on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley and the Tulare Basin.
You know what, Jim? I actually find that really surprising. I bet a lot of people don't realize that. Seems like with the influx of people, we would be using a lot more water, you know? But I think with the drought and the way everything is with the government right now, I think it probably will get down to court cases, because in the end, that's usually what people resonate with, is when you start getting into the money aspect of everything. And this reminds me also a lot of what you're saying, and I know you must run into this. I talk to a lot of people, and they're so misinformed, disinformed, and uninformed that it makes it difficult. Like, not too many people realize that, okay, there's water in Central California over towards the coast, but the saline solution is so high, they have to mix it with some really good water so they can use it for irrigation. You can't totally depend on that water. And I think a lot of hopes are pinned upon things like that. And if people knew better, I think they would take this a lot more serious. I mean, Owens Valley comes to mind. The first time I drove through Owens Valley, and somebody told me, "Yeah, there used to be a big lake here." That doesn't happen just overnight. That happens with a lot of planning behind the scenes.
Well, when the Owens Valley was dewatered, when Shasta Dam was built to create Shasta Reservoir, and even when the Oroville Dam was built to build Oroville Reservoir, environmental laws were either not in place or not strict enough to either anticipate or to mitigate the damages that those massive infrastructures incurred upon the landscape. But now we do have environmental laws, and these environmental laws help protect not just the wildlife that depends upon it, but helps to sustain and define carrying capacity within a region, which I think is very important for those of us who have dedicated their lives to staying put in this region, which I have done. I've decided it's important for me to dedicate my life to this watershed, that there's no place to run to. In fact, I think this is one of the more resilient places to endure the coming global changes in climate, the destabilization of the climate, even though we apparently are ground zero when it comes to wildland fires, as we've seen in the past few years with the tremendous out of control wildfires that decimated several communities in my county.
Right.
But on the other hand, I'm familiar with paleoclimatology, where this area has endured droughts that last over 100 years with only very intermittent wet years. And the people that lived here prior to the Americans moving to the Great Central Valley were able to endure these long droughts because the Central Valley has this robust and dynamic aquifer system that held the water and allowed the streams to continue to flow so that the salmon could continue their life cycle migration both in and out of the Central Valley, and for the oak trees to survive, because the groundwater created a buffer that a modicum of precipitation would refill it and keep the delta fresh and keep the brackish water in the bay robust, so that there was a vibrant ecosystem there and all the way down to Tulare Basin, where the Tulare Lake was. So this area is really built to endure climate fluctuations if we wisely manage the resource. And so my engagement with planning processes, bringing this information to the table, anticipating the future and looking at the past, is my role as a water policy analyst. But as you say, it's very important to keep that tool of environmental law, including litigation, in place. So we do have a team of dedicated, well-informed public trust lawyers who help us when we need to, for instance, challenge water sales out of the Sacramento Valley from senior water rights holders who would like to sell and transfer their surface water allocation for the year and then pump groundwater to replace it to continue growing their crops. In this case, usually rice crops that are grown. And rice, being a perennial crop, can be fallowed periodically if you have a dry year. Unlike all the nut trees that have been planted throughout the state, that in order to protect the investment, they need to water those every year, regardless of the precipitation. So an agriculture needs to maintain a flexibility so that we can fallow during dry periods. It needs to recognize carrying capacity so we don't expand beyond the carrying capacity of the hydrologic system. And so defending the ecology and the environment is something that I always bring to the table. But again, willing to challenge these things in court if people attempt to take economic advantage and make money by selling their surface water allocations and overusing the groundwater. I think that we need to, on dry years, actually hold back on the groundwater rather than looking at it as a backstop during the dry years. It's the groundwater that's going to provide us the buffer that we need to endure these periods of dryness. And we may be in the beginning period of one of these so-called mega droughts right now, where we have a sequence of dry years and then maybe a so-called average year, maybe a wet year, and then several dry years. That's the way these mega droughts occur, is many dry years interspersed with a few wet years. And so that's what I'm, again, bringing to the table, trying to get water managers and land managers recognition that this is normal in our region. And it's going to be more challenging with the global warming that's occurring because the droughts are going to be hotter and drier.
Yeah, and I think you also know, Jim, that this isn't the only problem on the table. We have to look at this from so many directions. I've been working with Chico State and putting out about regenerative agriculture, because the more I look into this regenerative agriculture, the more I'm realizing that done properly, we can hold a lot of carbon. The water gets retained better. It doesn't just run off. So even on a small micro level, I have a greenhouse and some raised garden beds. I'm trying to do my part in my backyard. And I think a lot of people, as they really tune into this, they could realize that we can all play an active part, albeit a small part, but we can all play an active part right in our backyards. It could make a huge difference.
Well, the fact that the majority of the citizens of California live in an urban environment is important to recognize. I was mentioning that 80% of the developed water goes to agriculture. Well, 80% of the domestic water goes to landscaping. And that can be greatly reduced by reducing the habit that Americans have of having big grassy lawns. It's as if they think they still live in England or in Europe, where they get precipitation all summer. Californians should have little, if any, grassy lawns. The greatest opportunity for urban conservation is to replace grassy lawns with less water intensive plants. So native plants are a good way to do it. Xeriscaping, that's with an X, I believe, that requires very little water. That mixed with other conservation tools, like low flow washing machine and low flow shower heads and other ways to conserve water, is one of the reasons why the metropolitan area has been able to level off their water demand. That mixed with recycling water and restoring some of their settling basins on their rivers, taking some of the concrete out of their storm drains, their storm rivers in Los Angeles and Orange County, et cetera. All these lead the urban environment to make much better use of their water. And so urbans do have a role to play, and there still is more room for improvement in the urban environment. So I applaud you for doing what you can as a homeowner to conserve water. If 30 million people do that, then that's going to go a long way to making a sustainable use of water in California.
Well, one down and 30 million to go, Jim. You know what? For people listening in, I want them to know how to get a hold of you. And the best way is through the AquAlliance website, right?
AquAlliance.net. And AquAlliance just has one A in the middle.
Right.
It's one word. Let's see if my t-shirt, what I'm seeing is a mirror image. I don't know if that's going to come across.
No, that looks good.
Oh, good. AquAlliance.net is our website. And that is one way to get a hold of this organization.
Yeah, and I noticed too, you have a lot of really good videos there. Susan Hildebrand, what is that? How you say her last name? She has a couple of really good videos on there where she's talking to this one guy. He's a almond farmer, and he was saying that back in the old days, 100 years ago, they used to plant the almond trees far, far apart, but now they cram them right together, and that doesn't allow for them to get enough groundwater, which means they have to be constantly watered. So I think we have to rethink the way we're doing groves and the way we're doing agriculture, everything from the ground up, which is actually a really good documentary if you haven't seen that. So I think we're going to have to call it quits right now. Man, this time went by really quick, Jim. We're going to have to do this sometime for my BBS radio show. But I'm going to have to cut this off now at 20 minutes. So I thank you for your time, and hopefully let's get together. I mean, when time and situations allow. I've been practicing my guitar quite a bit, so we should try to get together sometime.
Rahasya, I'm at your service.
All right, man. Thank you very much for your time.
I look forward to seeing you. Bye.